Hi everyone, this is Andrew Prima, Ukrainian American, living and reporting from the capital of Ukraine, Kyiv. I'm a founder of Ukraine Business News, UBN.news, reporting from the front lines of the Ukrainian war with Russia. In today's podcast, sixth week of war in Ukraine. So I would like to cover a few topics. Kyiv region towns are liberated, but the number of dead civilians is growing daily. New Russian terror in Kramatorsk town, 50 people are dead within seconds. Russian army regrouping and concentrating to take over Donbas region. The latest and most horrible massacre in town of Bucha by Russian army has shocked the whole world. Ukrainian forces moved into the city near Kiev in the beginning of the sixth week of war. They found what officials and witnesses said were the bodies of 300 civilians killed by Russian troops during a month-long occupation. Bodies of men and women who were killed had their hands tied behind their backs. Dozens of women were raped in front of their children and then shot in the head. Dozens of dead bodies are laying on the street. Our reporters saw at least 20 bodies strewn across a single street, all in civilian clothing. One had one had his hands tied behind his back with a white cloth, and his Ukrainian passport left open beside his body. Evidence has emerged of possible civilian killings around Kiev as the Russian army has pulled back in the face of ferocious resistance from Ukrainian forces. Several international journalists and witnesses have named this horror the massacre of 21st century. The mayor of town Bucha, where the horror happened, in Kiev region, said that 90% of the residents who died during the occupation of the city by the Russian occupiers were shot. According to him, people died mainly from shootings and not from artillery shelling. According to expertise, almost 90% of murdered people had bullet wounds. The world was shocked by the horrible footage of mass graves. Currently, three places were found in Bucha where the Russian invaders dumped the bodies of people with their hands tied behind the backs and wound shots in the head. Currently, out of these three mass graves, there were 40, 30 people thrown as a wood and with the soil put on the top of those bodies, hoping that nobody is gonna find them. According to one of the witnesses of that horror, he said that he saw a checkpoint of the Russian invaders, and they shot three cars at a certain time interval. There were four people in one car: a man, a pregnant woman, and two children. Three of them were shot. The woman's body was buried with her husband in the trench that the Russian occupiers had dug for their shelter. Instead of a cross, they installed the license plate of the car in which they were traveling, and the bodies of the children were taken to the church and buried there. The man who buried the couple took the dead bodies of the children and took them to the church where some witnesses said he buried them. Another town bordering with Bucha was Borodyanka. This town was erased from the earth. There was no high-rise buildings left after Russian occupation. There is only one street in this town with high-rise buildings. There is nothing left. Everything was bombed and destroyed. The prosecutor general, Irina Venediktova, stated that the bodies of 26 people were found just in the last day. which were found under the rubble of two houses in Borodyanka. So the witnesses said that there was no military infrastructure at all. On February 26th, 27th February, 26th, 27th February, the orcs came in, first with tanks, but after Ukrainian civilians had thrown either a Molotov cocktail or a grenade, they stopped because they were afraid to proceed. What they did, they called for Russian aviation. This aviation flew over and threw dozens of bombs over the city, which was enough to destroy pretty much everything. Another town which was next to Bucha and Borodyanka is Hostomel. Recently, after Russians left, there were found around 400 people, 400 dead people, and the same 400 people missing in the last 35 days of occupation of Hostomel. There was evidence that the Russian army was burning the bodies of Ukrainians in order to hide the number of killed people, in order to hide the evidence. You should see what mothers have to do in order to save their children. They tie a badge to kids' clothes with their names, phone numbers, or any information that will help to save children in case if parents die or get killed or taken by Russian occupiers. Last week, another region that was liberated from Russian invaders, Chernihiv region. That region is located in eastern part of Ukraine, east from Kiev. So some of Russian troops were pushed back by Ukrainian army. Some of them regrouped and moved back to Russian territory and currently on the way to Donbas region, which is located in southern east part of Ukraine. The mayor of Chernihiv declared that for reconstruction for the city after attacks of the Russian occupiers will take at least 4 years because all the infrastructure, most of the buildings are totally destroyed and cannot be restored. He clarified that about 150 high-rise apartment buildings were severely damaged. Those on the surface, in particular wires of communications, are destroyed by 70 to 100%. Since the start of full-scale Russian invasion, artillery strikes and air strikes by occupiers in Chernihiv have killed more than 700 people, and another 40 are still missing. And more and more people killed, discovered on a daily basis. So these numbers are not final. So when all is over, it might be more than thousands of people dead in Chernihiv region. According to the mayor, there's still a large number of missing people, and we suspect that these people were burned alive in places where heavy bombs were used. We have cases when a man was waiting for his wife. She was in the hospital. He called her and said, "I'll be waiting for you at the door." In a minute, an air bomb fell where he stood, and this person was not found anywhere, not even the remains. The man burned. That is, the temperature of these air bombs is very high, within a radius of which everything that can be burned in seconds. We have also seen this in damaged cars all over the place, where all non-metallic parts burn out completely, leaving a red metal with signs of high combustion temperatures. Currently, lots of people were pulled out of the rubble. That is why the final statistics will be announced later, given that the legal death of some people the government will never be able to prove. The chairman of another region, Mykolaiv region, fighting furiously, and the regional state administration declared that there were no Russian occupiers in the area remain, only a few villages in the south. They backing down. But because these monsters can do anything, can they shell on our cities remotely from the tornadoes to sow panic among the people and cause maximum damage to civilians. At the same time, they're throwing fakes all over the media, saying that they're going there. They have 1,000 tanks, 700 rocket launchers, 5,000 people. However, they're not there. They, on the contrary, are redeployed. They do not abandon. They redeployed and moved toward the Donbass region. They actually do not abandon military equipment anymore, the way it used to. They used to show. They used to do in the beginning of the war, because the commanders ordered to take equipment back. It should be repaired and put back to war. There is another evidence that Russian army is not doing well at all. A couple of days ago, the world was shocked by a terrible war crime in the city of Kramatorsk in Donetsk region. A missile strike was fired at a train station where thousands of civilians were preparing for evacuation. It is known about 50 people are dead, including children. Hundreds of them were injured, many in serious condition. The wreckage of the missile fired by Tochka U, Point U, was found on a spot. Before actually the Russians launched this missile toward Kramatorsk, they painted on it in Russian language for the children. The Kremlin denies that these weapons are used by the Russian army, but numerous sources confirm that Point U is in the hands of the aggressor. The occupiers launched Point U in the Kramatorsk railway station, where thousands of peaceful Ukrainians were staying and waiting for the train to be evacuated. Russian terrorists do not abandon their methods, lacking the strength and courage to stand up to us on the battlefield. They cynically destroying the civilian population. Besides that, as you might know, the list of Russians' war crimes over the first 6 weeks of the war has become vast. In addition to mass killings and torture of civilians, targeted destruction of infrastructure and housing, Russia also uses illicit ammunitions in Ukraine. These include phosphorus munitions, cluster munitions, and particularly dangerous anti-personnel mines, which are prohibited by many international conventions. Russian propaganda, which initially claimed that Kramatorsk was affected by the gathering of Ukrainian army forces militants, was immediately reoriented. Pro-Kremlin telegram channels began to write that people waiting for the evacuation train were fired upon by Ukrainians, as Point U is the service of the armed forces. The US Department of Defense has confirmed that a missile strike on the Kramatorsk railway station was carried out by Russia. Obviously, we didn't buy the Russians' objections that they were not responsible for this strike. At first, they claimed a successful strike, but then they denied it as soon as the consequences were announced, said a Pentagon spokesman. Still, despite all the losses and failure, Russia seeks victory over Ukraine by May 9th. As you all might know, May 9th is a victory day. The victory day that was accomplished by USSR in the Second World War II. In 1945, May 9th was the day of victory over Germany. Since then, Russia celebrates this day as a day of victory. So, Russia still seeks to defeat Ukraine in its full-scale aggression by May 9th, and therefore under pressure to achieve its goal by that date. This was cited by the European officials. According to them, a month before the date of the Soviet victory over Germany in World War II, Russia is regrouping and transferring its forces to the southeast of Ukraine in order to achieve some kind of regional victory. You understand that Russian army has to bring some victory, and they didn't confirm any losses because they have to explain the story over Ukraine, and they have to be winners of this war. According to one of the European officials, lack of time can lead to mistakes of the Russian armed forces, which are exacerbated by the problems of logistics and demoralization, which they are already facing. Another official said the political timing of the war could lead to a military catastrophe as a result, as well as new atrocities by Russia. First time since the beginning of the war, the Kremlin acknowledged Russia's significant losses in Ukraine. Russian troops have suffered heavily battlefield losses during the invasion of Ukraine, said the Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov for the Sky News. He said, "We have significant casualties among soldiers, which is a great tragedy for us," Peskov said. However, he didn't announce the number of Russian soldiers who are already considered dead in Ukraine since the beginning of the Russian invasion. Russian propaganda is in despair, which means they have encountered circumstances that were not taken into account, which very strong resistance with huge thousands of losses, which have seriously undermined the fighting capacity of the Russian army, and now the Russians are no longer sure that they will be able to impose their conditions on Ukraine. Now, the situation is getting worse for them because they realized that the attempt to capture the whole of Ukraine failed. That is, the panicked departure from the north, the dumping of many hundreds of units of military equipment. All this means that the Russians' plan to seize Ukraine has failed, and now Russia is trying to cut off pieces from Ukraine where it has the most strength, which is Donbas region. Ukrainian intelligence reports that Russia is regrouping in an attempt to seize Kharkiv. CNN sources say Moscow needs at least some significant success before the important day of a victory day that I told you before. Meanwhile, Ukrainian defenders continue to defeat the enemy. According to the according to the ABC News that interviewed the Pentagon, between 15 to 20% of the aggressive fighting force was totally destroyed. The West continues to strike at Russia on the sanctions front, not only Russian oligarchs, but also the daughters of dictator Vladimir Putin. According to a Pentagon official, Russia intends to recruit more than 60,000 new troops, and after the resumption of Russian battalion tactical groups, the most likely course of action will be their immediate advance south toward Donbas region. The Pentagon estimates that more than 40 Russian battalion tactical groups are stationed in the near Donbas area. There were more than 30 on April 6, meaning that up to 10,000 more troops have arrived in recent days. We know from Russian detailed documentation that the losses of the equipment were greater. For example, 425 tanks are known to have been destroyed, damaged, abandoned, or captured. There are reports that many spare weapons exported from the warehouse suffer from aging and damage, lack of key components, and not functioning ammunition. Planes and helicopters were vulnerable to air defenses, and many were shut down. The inability of Russian aviation to maintain its position remains one of the hallmarks of this campaign. Russia's personnel reserve is also not in the best condition. Moscow is looking for additional soldiers to be recruited, whether Syrian volunteers or Wagner's mercenary groups. As already mentioned, the Belarusian army is not longer available, and troops from South Ossetia, a separatist enclave in Georgia, have decided to decline the invitation when asked to travel to Ukraine. A new group of conscripts is now being drafted into the army. However, mothers and wives of killed Russian soldiers started raising their voices all over the country. Putin regime has started losing its strength and confidence. Sometimes things cannot be hidden. Sometimes you cannot hide the truth because there is a thousands of mothers and wives without sons and husbands. The fight over Donbass most likely will be similar to World War II, with major operations and maneuvers involving thousands of tanks, armored vehicles, aircrafts, and artillery. It will not be a local operation. Given what we see, Russia has its plan, we have our own, and the outcome of this battle will be decided on the battlefield. Now, it's very crucial for Ukraine that NATO allies do not tell Ukraine that they are still thinking and must follow all the procedures in order to provide any weapons. Ukraine needs this weapon now. Now and as soon as possible, we should get it in order to defend our land. We must liberate our territories. Otherwise, there will be no Ukraine, no freedom. We need to become free so we can start rebuilding Ukraine for our new generations. Glory to Ukraine. Glory to Ukrainian defenders for protecting our land. Dear listeners, thank you so much for listening my podcast. UBN is a team of 12 people, and despite the Russian invasion, we're still in Ukraine and continuing delivering the news to the world. The UBN team would like to kindly and humbly ask you to donate to our operation in order to allow us to continue our existence and deliver the news. You can go to our website www.ubn.news and click Support UBN Team. Thank you so much.